Misha here, and recently I did a video on the Japanese Type 30 Transitional Arasaka Bayonet because a buddy helped me find one that I was needing for the collection. Please don't turn off of this video because it's about another bayonet. I mentioned in that one he helped me find another one I was kind of needing. This one being British. Ironically, about a year and a half ago, I told friends and family that I needed some more No.4 infield type bayonets because they're cheap and I only had a couple and I ended up with several. But this one's a relatively rare one. The No.7 Mark 1L Land Service Bayonet Switch-Pommel combat knife. An interesting effort post-war that wasn't as successful as you might think, but actually led the way to a blade and scabbard that would be in service to the 21st century. And it all goes back to this. The Lee Enfield No.4. This is my Mark II, but for our purposes right now, 1939, we're talking about the Mark I. They wanted to make a rifle that was more accurate, but also cheaper to produce, faster to produce, less labor-intensive because of the war. And so they looked for ways to save money and also save weight, because to get better accuracy, they added a slightly longer, heavier barrel. You know, it is a heavier gun versus the previous Mark III. And of course, the Mark III had a rather nice bayonet that went with it. Well, for the No.4, we're not doing that. We're doing this jobber. The No.4, well, this is a Mark II, but you get the idea, the tent post, the pig sticker. Now, the Mark I was the same, except it actually had grooves machined all the way up and down, kind of, Phillips head screwdriver look to it. I've had one in the past, but they only made about $75,000, and someone else wanted it. By the way, this is a Mark I scabbard, just kind of tubular tapered steel, drain hole, belt hanger. And it went back to the old kind of socket style of mounting. We saw this a lot in the 19th century. But when we went to blades, it kind of went away. Well, we're back to it here. It saves weight and time. So they like that. They determined that an 8-inch pig sticker, overall length of 10 inches, was enough for combat use with this length of a barrel. And it was light. It was only, about half a pound on the soldier's kit. The problem was, it wasn't really useful for much of anything. I mean, jokingly, I call it a tent stake, but what else can you do with this? It didn't make for a good fighting implement, really, and it even got cheaper during the war. They introduced the Mark II scabbard here. There's also a Mark III that was made out of a kind of a bakelite material, and they did do the Mark II Star bayonet, which was made out of two pieces that were machined and either pinned or welded together. But in 43, they made this version, the Mark III, which is stamped in welded steel back here, just globs of weld, and then a forged pig sticker. It's noticeably lighter than the previous one. I've recently done a couple of videos looking at all the variations, because when I asked friends and family to kind of keep an eye out, I ended up with several different types of these over the last year and a half, because they are inexpensive and therefore kind of fun to collect. I mean, you can get a scabbard and bayonet set for $20-30, give or take. Even some less common versions like this aren't really valued much more in most pawn shops. But this got real cheap. But they made fewer than 200,000 of these, because by 1944, obviously after D-Day, the war was changing, and we would see the Enfield itself, which had a lot of wartime economies, get some features back, and ultimately that would lead to the No.4 Mark II here in 1949, which was really just a peacetime, nice version of the No.4, really what it was always kind of meant to be. And another gun that didn't really have a lot to lose in the beginning suffered even more indignities in 1943, just like the bayonet. The Sten Mark I was already a highly simplified Bergman. The Mark II took it a step further, and the Mark III it was stamped in welded steel. It's actually kind of my favorite for just how wartime rough it was. But then they stepped it back to the Sten Mark V here, trying to give British soldiers something more like a Thompson, just a little nicer. You know, you get a wood stock, you get a cleaning kit trapdoor, pistol grip. Rear sight's unchanged, but you got a number 4 Enfield style front sight, and the barrel had a lug to take a bayonet. And at the time, they just had the pig sticker here. Okay. Thing is, most of the time, these guns would be given to commandos, special forces, guys that would definitely need a combat knife, a fighting knife, utility knife. So there was really no point in issuing them a pig sticker. It was just more crap for them to keep track of, an extra half pound of weight. But then that same year, this came out. The number 5 bayonet for the Jungle Carbine. This is a return to a blade. It's a new pattern. It's about 8 inches. An overall length of about 12.5. Muzzle ring for the big flash hider conical thing on there. Wood grips. Pretty nice, grooved. But of course, this would not fit either the Mark V Sten or the Enfield. Obviously, if you tried, I mean, there's no place to go. Even if you could get on there, you'd be shooting through your bayonet. Not typically good unless you're trying to launch the blade. But it got troops kind of envious of the guys with the Jungle Carbine, as we refer to it today, because this is what they wanted. It could be used in a couple of different roles, and even though it was a little bit heavier, about 1.5 pounds at most in the scabbard. A little under 1 pound just for the blade itself, and not a lot longer. So that got him thinking that year in 1944, and the company, Wilkinson, kind of took the ideas, and that's where we get today's featured bayonet. The scabbard is literally the same. The blade and the crossguard are the same. Ring, hole there, fullard. The grips, very similar, but these are a synthetic material, fiberglass or something. And we do have a large socket in the back here that would work with the muzzle end of an Enfield. Got it on backwards, but it kind of illustrates what I'm trying to get at. You can't lock this on, obviously, because if you did, you'd shoot through it. So the solution was adding this little up here. Has the same kind of release as the previous socket down here. And now we can go on, no problem. By the way they made it, this is locked out, so you can't get it all the way. See? You'll hit your muzzle before anything. But if you were to hit that, well, you might imagine, but we're not quite there yet. This was thought to be a good idea to give the troops something better, and it would fit multiple guns, or just be used as a combat knife or utility knife, fighting knife. That way troops can kind of get away from the various stilettos or U.S. imported blades like the M3 that appeared in England at the time. So Wilkinson made an order, pre-production really, of 1,000 of these in 1944, seemingly delivering them in 1945. And what's interesting, that January, it wasn't the Enfield here that was first cleared to use it, but rather our old friend, the Stend. Again, combining two tools, and that they're going to carry a knife. Well, now they can at least put it on their subgun in case of emergency. And it definitely gives a longer reach compared to the number 4 Bayonet 2. And Generally speaking, soldiers found it to be a good combat knife. They liked the grips. The blade was a nice blade, tested, and everything else. So it was approved for use on the Sten and also the Enfield number 4. It's very unlikely that many, if any, of the pre-productions got into theater before VE Day. Definitely none of the full production ones did because these weren't really ordered until later that year. One problem there, though, Wilkinson post-war was kind of out of the military contract game for various reasons, so they had to tap other manufacturers. 2 would be basically government. You had the Royal Ordnance Factory at Newport, and you had the Royal Ordnance Factory Pool. You would also have 2 private commercial, Birmingham Small Arms, BSA, and another Birmingham company, Elkington, which I'm not really familiar with. It seems like they were expected to build about 100,000 each of these. That seems to have been the contracts, at least for the 2 private companies, meaning a projection of over 300,000 were ordered in 1945. But how many were actually made? 176,000, give or take, because there were problems. Some are pretty obvious. In fact, most are, frankly. This is a cool design, the switch hilt thing, but it's complicated to make and to maintain. And you have this big ring out front. I think their reasoning was they could use the same crossguard from the Jungle's Bayonet, and it also kind of doubled as, you know, hand protector, a place to put your thumb. Notice there's no edge here, so you're safe. I think they would have been better off just cutting it off kind of Mauser style. Would have been fine. But they wanted it to be a fighting knife. And there were always concerns, although they seem to be mostly unfounded, but theoretically I could definitely see it, of an exiting bullet hitting this. That was kind of, I'm going to leave that in. That's kind of good. But, you know, making it, you know, flip around, come up, and get near the muzzle. You know, even if it wasn't fire, I understand that. We already kind of showed it on the rifle there. You know, just coming out of whack and getting wacky. It makes sense. It really, really does. But they really liked this blade. So the solution was pretty obvious. Basically, just cut out the middle bit. Keep the socket, keep the blade, keep the scabbard. Creating the number 9 Mark I bayonet here. These would actually first be in production, really even before they were officially accepted in 1947 at the Royal Ordnance Factory Pool. And they were meant for the number 4 Mark II, which itself had not even been formally adopted yet. The thing is, replacing the number 4 Mark I was a priority after the war. It was that much disliked. But the budget, they had to kind of wait. So the blade was carried over with the socket, meaning that Pool would only produce, I always stick that in wrong. There's a spring in here that makes them a little sticky. Pool would only make about 30,000 of these. Now, BSA would make 25,000 out of their potential 100,000, and Elkington would make 20,000. The real big maker that did 100,000 was the Royal Ordnance Factory at Newport. That's where we get the total, including the 1,000 Wilkinsons of 176,000 here. And production would end by 1948. I think Newport would be the final maker, give or take. It would still serve with the Sten Mark V for a minute. The thing is, the Sten Mark V itself was destined to soon be retired in favor of the Patchett, soon to be the Sterling submachine gun, which actually used this bayonet, the jungle carbine, because the jungle itself was being phased out, but the bayonets are still good. So waste not, want not. So those are going away. As far as the infield, even though this was officially for it, it never really was used in combat. The only time you really saw them used was ceremonial duties, parade duties, show duties, because it is a more attractive bayonet than the pig sticker. And in some instances, these would still appear in parades and guards and that kind of thing into the 60s and 70s. Because, I mean, you do have a good number. But, heck, this one here, pool, between 1947 and 1949, they would produce over 200,000. This goes to show you how much easier and faster this was. And while pool would kind of calm down after that and do other things, well, the Royal Small Arms Factory infield would pick up. Here's one. They would start making these around 1949, with primary runs through 56 and another brief run in the early 60s, and they would build about 375,000. Fazekreli, making the number 4 Mark II, would build more, although I don't know an exact number, and often serial match them to their guns. And there would be small private contractors that made unknown numbers, and Canada would make some, and what else have you. There's also kind of a weird sub-variant that I just gotta show you here. The South African number 9, so I've sometimes seen it said as the R1 bayonet. Yeah, South Africa definitely had infields. And as they would get sanctioned and need more blades, they would make their own. The socket here, but if you notice, our bayonet, a little bit shorter. That's because they took the socket and attached it to an Uzi blade. So it's about 6.5 inches versus 8. They had them, waste not, want not. I believe they also made some just standard ones, but these always kind of struck me as cool, including using the kind of multi-purpose polymer scabbard. Keep in mind that South Africa had Uzis. I believe they were made at Littleton, and other identifiable factories. I just think it's a kind of a cool variation, so I thought I'd mention it. Back to England, the number 4 would be retired in the late 50s finally, ending a long service of the Metford and Infields. But its number 9 bayonet would survive it. Well, 2/3 of this would. Not to go too deep, but the L1A1, the SLR, used the same clip point fullered blade, 8 inches, same number 5 scabbard. Belt hanger could change some. We just added grips. Of course, a new lug system. It's actually very, very similar to our jungle here again, just with a different end piece, really, and a different ring size. And Canada and Australia, the springs being ornery. Some of these will go in both ways, some won't. And you'll see variations here. For example, the fuller is different on this. That's a whole other thing in and of itself. British versus Canadian versus Australian versus even some weird Indian hybrids. But the blade and the overall kind of feel Rubber is retained. Hey, I got it right that time. And so in some ways, even though our land services here wasn't successful, it was mostly due to the mounting system. So when they could purpose build a lug and setup for it, it worked just as well as the jungle, proving that the blade and all that, the balance as a knife, was fine. So in some ways, it was the right design at the wrong time for the wrong rifle. See, now this one, the ring's pointing, there we go. That spring, I guess I can just be ornery. Because Britain would still field these as late as the first Gulf War. I know, the L-85 was officially in service by then. There's still plenty of L-1A1s around, and guys that wish they still had them after how the A1 performed. And that's why I kind of wanted a No.7 Mark 1L here, because it kind of kicked that off. Well, it and the No.5. Again, this was used with the the Sterling, which, by the way, Sterling Company actually made some fresh jungle carbine pattern bayonets with synthetic grips, mostly for export. These are just cool to me, and I appreciate those that have hung out with me this long in the video. If you have, definitely comment, like, share, subscribe, tell a buddy. If you can, if you'd like to help support, there's always Patreon. But I just, a buddy went out of his way. He found this for me at a gun show, went back and got it. And even if it's just me and you watching this, I just had to do a video because it does make me happy. And that's something I kind of want to share about collecting. It doesn't have to be big, expensive guns or anything. It can be inexpensive things. And even though this is one of the more expensive British bayonets, it still wasn't very much compared to, K98 and American bayonets and that kind of stuff. All of these are a fun way to collect, and the L1A1s aren't expensive, really, and the No.9s, they're kind of just everywhere, and they're definitely a nicer looking muzzle attachment for your infield, at least I think so. But let me know what you think. What's your favorite look? Maybe you like the big sticker. That's okay. It's okay to be wrong. No, it's a cool bayonet for what it is, but these are definitely better, I think, as far as just all around. Anyway, I appreciate you hanging out today. This is Misha. Catch you very soon next time.